So I'd like to welcome everyone and thank you for your attendance at this special Pediatric Grand Rounds event at Phoenix Children's Hospital. I want to personally thank our corporate sponsors, Terumo, Annuncia, and Alcyone Life Sciences. I want to remind everyone that after Grand Rounds, we're going to have a roundtable discussion between academia, industry, and our clinical partners in the neuroscience classroom in the Barrow Neurologic Institute outpatient building next door. And for those of you who are visiting, we'll try to go over there together so nobody will get lost. I'm going to introduce our speakers in alphabetical order. So we have two guest speakers today. Dr. Haridas is a professor of biomedical engineering and a medical technology entrepreneur, whom I've known for more than 15 years as a co-inventor, co-investigator, and co-author and friend. Dr. Haridas has more than 28 years of experience in the research and development and commercialization of medical devices for minimally invasive surgery, endovascular interventions, wound healing, and tissue repair and regeneration. Dr. Haridas is a distinguished fellow of the American Institute of Medical and Biomedical Engineering Technology and has led more than 18 medical devices through the processes of FDA approval and product launch. Dr. Haridas is currently the professor and director of the BioInnovations program at Texas A&M University. He serves as the executive director of the Texas A&M Engineering Division of Commercialization and Medical Entrepreneurship. Finally, Dr. Haridas is the Texas A&M site PI and co-founder of the $7 million FDA-funded Southwest Regional Pediatric Medical Device Consortium, which he will discuss with you today. Dr. Chester Koh is a pediatric urologist at Texas Children's Hospital and professor of urology, pediatrics, and Ob-Gyn at the Baylor College of Medicine. He serves as the director of pediatric robotic surgery and director of the Pediatric Urology Fellowship Program at Texas Children's Hospital. He is founder and contact PI of the Southwest Pediatric Medical Device Consortium, and he is formerly the director of the California Pediatric Medical Device Consortium. The consortium is intended to be an FDA-supported organization to assist the development of pediatric medical devices and pediatric medical device innovators. Dr. Koh is also co-founder of the Consortium for Technology and Innovation in Pediatrics. He is membership co-chair for the American Academy of Pediatric section on urology and serves as the leadership team chairman for the American Academy of Pediatrics section on advances in therapeutics and technology, which is dedicated to improving children's health through pediatric innovation. So without further ado, I give you Dr. Koh and Dr. Haridas.
I really want to thank you for the kind invitation to come and the opportunity to present in front of you. I want to say hello and thank you to all of our old colleagues as well as new colleagues coming from Texas Children's as well as Children's LA in the past. So I thought the outline today, we're really going to talk about innovation and really has it to do with pediatric devices. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the FDA program, how we developed a consortium both in LA as well as in Houston, and talk about some of the common steps we use for early stage pediatric medical device development within academia. And then Dr. Haridas will talk about some case studies, how practically one can develop a pediatric device, and leave time for discussion Q&A. I hope you keep in mind that we do have some alternate titles for the talk. Think about this, that maybe this could be a way that pediatric clinicians can avoid burnout. Also think that maybe this is how busy pediatric clinicians can participate in research. So what is the problem? We know that we need better pediatric medical devices for kids. It's a public health problem. It's an unmet need. We know that pediatric devices lag adult devices by at least 10 years. We know that the market-based approach, the profit-based approach doesn't work for us in pediatrics because we have smaller populations, less profit potential. It's just not as easy to develop devices for kids. And so this led to advocacy by many groups, including the American Academy of Pediatrics, that led to an act of Congress in 2007, and that led to the FDA Pediatric Device Consortium program. These are P50 grants. So, it takes a village to raise a kid, it takes a village to build a consortium. So back when I was at Children's LA, I moved to Houston in 2013 to Texas Children's, but back when I was at Children's LA USC, we basically started a consortium. I saw the grant program, I saw it, the second round, which was only 2-year grants back then, tried to get us ready. Weren't quite ready for that second round. So I was able to win a USC faculty collaboration grant, paid for dinners, got people together, collaborated, build collaborations among the faculty at the different campuses at USC, and hence we built what we call the Southern California Consortium for Technology and Innovation Pediatrics, or CTIP. We're talking the medical school, engineering school, business school, a lot of the local ecosystem that is technology and engineering based. And hence that led to, in 2013, this grant was submitted the day I left, and we actually won $1.5 million over 5 years. Now, what it meant, though, is I had moved to Texas Children's, and so I stayed a small part of that by bringing a small software to Texas Children's. But we basically were helping pediatric device innovators, I in Texas, and the majority of the consortium still in Southern California. And so what do we do? I mean, if you look at the right side, these are some of the common steps of pediatric device development. It's not a linear process, I know, but these are some of the steps that you have to think about and try to achieve. And the entire program of all the consortia, the 2013-18 cycle had 7 consortia for those 5 years. They helped about 1,000 pediatric device projects, about 700 innovators were advised. It did lead to some that actually reached the clinical realm, but there were only 25, and most of them were really kind of the low-risk 510K Class 1 devices. But still, because of the work, these things take time. In that short amount of time, be able to get some devices that got into the clinical realm and to the bedside. So this is an example. So this is a optoacoustic monitor for kids in the perinatal period. This came out of University of Texas Medical Branch in Galveston, or UTMB. This was a Texas-based company that had kind of reached what they could in Texas at that time, and they kind of run out of options, looking at their cash flow. They need some help. So at the time, we had a consortia in Southern California. We brought them through the Southern California Consortia. They got access to other resources and talented personnel, and hence, I can tell you they went through the Phillips Incubator, and I think we have a lot of high hopes for them. They've raised millions of dollars in funding, and I think that you'll see them at some point in the clinical realm. But I think the CTIP, or the Pediatric Device Consortia system, was very helpful during their lean years. So now, move forward to Houston in 2013. Some of you may know Dr. Robbins. He became the Texas Medical Center CEO, and he brought with him a vision of innovation commercialization for the Houston, Texas Medical Center area. As you know now, he's the president of the University of Arizona and left a couple years ago to come here. But what he did was lay the seed, as well as with many of the people he recruited and who were still at Texas Medical Center and in TMCX, their Innovation Institute. They were able to attract as well as gather, many of them had already been there, but a lot of the institutions and programs that we could use for device development, not just for adults, but also for kids. And so similar to what we did in Southern California, we basically took a village, got a lot of people together. We had some seed grants from Texas Children's to bring people together and build a consortium. And hence, that's where we are. We basically applied for the next round of funding. It just started in September. This is the FDA P50 grant, multi-PI, $6.75 million over 5 years. So I serve as the Texas Children's PI with Henry Justino, a pediatric cardiologist. Balakrishna serves as the Texas A&M PI. We have Maria Odin at Rice, Richard Wilson at the University of Houston, as well as Mike Heffernan at Fan Innovation Studio, which is a local device development firm. As you see, we have a lot of institutions all dedicated towards helping pediatric device innovators move their device projects forward. And so some of the things that we can provide are product and technology acceleration services, as well as business acceleration services. Now, as we built the consortium, very much thanks to Dr. Haridas, he had a lot of friends in many different places. We had colleagues that we brought into the consortium in the San Antonio Austin hub, and Texas Children's does have a strong relationship with Children's Hospital San Antonio, so that's another hub. We did the roadshow and met them, introduced consortium to them as well, and here we are, Phoenix, doing the same, introducing the consortium, and looking forward to working with you as well. It does, most of the funding is for pediatric device funding. We have a real-world evidence project. I won't get that today, but these are things that the FDA is looking at to help kids and get them their needed pediatric medical devices. So I think some of the reasons why we got funded are really some of the success stories that had been in Houston already at Texas Children's. Some of you may know the Berlin Heart, a pediatric ventricular assist device. Some of the primary studies were done at Texas Children's with Chuck Frazier when he was there, as well as Ike Adachi. Visualase, another strong story of a pediatric device. Those clinical studies were done at Texas Children's, working out of biotechs and Texas A&M to build an ablative catheter that's MRI safe, and these were done in epilepsy patients at Texas Children's. And there are some other emerging devices that we'll see hopefully in the near future as well. So that led to our consortia getting funded. There are 5 consortia now. They reduced the number and gave us all more money. So we actually are the only new one. The other ones had been in existence and have received money in the last round. But all of us work together. We're not competitive. I think there is some geographic separation, so of course those are a little bit closer to consortium, you may want to work with them. But we're a national consortium, so anywhere, any innovator anywhere can come to us for assistance. And so these are some of the things that we do. Now, we have a lot of redundancy in our system. If you talk about the different steps of the pediatric device life cycle, whether it's building the concept, this is where the surgeons and clinicians are. They're in the OR or in the clinics. They see an unmet need and they have a device idea. Then they start working with an engineering team. It could be through the capstone team for prototyping. You start getting the preclinical or animal testing, eventually the clinical realm. But also the further steps of manufacturing, marketing, and commercialization, of which you will need those commercial partners. So we have all that in the consortium. We have all that in the consortium. And so we'll talk a little bit about the capstone and master's program in a little bit, but I want to bring your attention to the commercial partners. You know, we have a lot of commercial partners. I mean, there's a lot of engineering talent in the Houston area, as there is here in Phoenix. You need those partners to take the steps of a prototype that's in academia to get to the next step so they can get into the clinical realm, can get manufactured, and actually can be used by patients. Device startups come to us. We have at least 20. I think we're actually about 32 now. But these are some of the projects, you know, ranging from all different aspects in the pediatric clinical realm. A lot of pediatric urology products. I'm a pediatric urologist. Some of our colleagues are coming to us. But think of all the different things that need help. These are all startups, all need help in different aspects. And it all starts with intake forms. So when a device innovator comes to us, we give them the intake form, they fill it out, we learn about them, see where they are. First have to confirm that they are actually a device as defined by the FDA, and we learn about how we can best help them. Maybe it's access to a regulatory consultant, access to an IP attorney. Perhaps it's seed funding. We do give out quite a bit of seed funding. We also can bring them to our other partners at the different universities, such as Baylor at Texas A&M, who can give them commercialization and entrepreneur expertise to help their device projects. We also can give out direct device funding. This is all non-dilutive, no strings attached funding. We don't take any equity. We're not interested. Everything the innovator keeps. And so there are some long-standing pitch competitions, not necessarily pediatric, but we added a pediatric prize to them. So Impact Pediatric Health is at South by Southwest each year in March. We're one of the 7 children's hospitals that jointly put it on. And we gave out recently $100,000, which are 4 $25,000 prizes at the event. The Rice Business Plan competition coming up, that's geared towards graduate students, and Baylor is very involved with the Texas A&M New Ventures, which is limited more to Texas companies, but these are all different opportunities that one can apply to, even here from Phoenix. This applies only to the Baylor College of Medicine faculty, but this is an example of the type of funding that a hospital or medical school can provide to its faculty. So the Baylor College of Medicine, because we got the grant funding, added in additional funding to the consortium. They want to see it as faculty seat grants. That's the mechanism they use. This is something that, say, a faculty member has their own device, needs some help to build it, they get $25,000 this way. Or if you're a device startup and you're going to approach a busy clinician because you need that clinical data for that pilot study, I think this can go very well towards a clinical coordinator to help you get that data. These are instead of just you doing it for free. So I think there's a lot of benefits to this type of work. Sorry. I have a chronic cough, sorry. So now say you're a busy clinician and you don't have a prototype yet. I think many of you may be familiar with the capstone programs. Every accredited engineering school has this program. I think if but we as yeah, I'm going to take a fluid.
All right. I'll try to do my best. So what Chester is talking about is the idea of how do you put the pieces in place to connect the ecosystem. And he's referring to most engineering schools which have the undergraduate program, and the culmination experience is the capstone experience. How many of you are from engineering here? I know there's a few. So you all know about capstone programs, right? So the capstone program, puts a student team around a project. In this case, a clinician comes up with a problem statement, and so the end point of that is typically a product requirements document that has been developed and a conceptual solution. You good?
I'm good.
All right.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. That's a great partner. So, we as clinicians may not be familiar with the capstone programs. So basically, Bala, as well as many of us, put together a cohort in 2015, 2016. And thank you very much to the Texas Children's Department of Surgery to give us a seed grant to help pay for this. But we put together probably about 12 teams. These are surgeons coming up with unmet needs they see in the ORs or the clinics. They put it all in a one-page description of their unmet need and maybe the goals of the device, but not the solution. That's for the engineers. And then we basically were able to partner with them such that they worked through the academic year from September to April to build a prototype. It's a great academic program, a great educational program for the engineering students, but it actually is a pretty good prototype development pathway. And so our goal is try to get to a three-way partnership where you have the children's hospital, the engineering school, as well as a device development firm that can serve as a commercialization expert. So this is my example. So I'm a pediatric robotic surgeon. I fix kidney blockages or take care of kidney stones. We often leave a urethral stent. I often have to take the kids back to the OR for a second procedure. So I want to try to avoid that second procedure. We have to remove the stent, so we want to come up with something that would help us to remove the stent while taking the child back to a second surgery. So we did some brainstorming. First, the surgeon had to put down what the unmet need is. Then we formed a team with engineering students, either Rice or Texas A&M. They came to the hospital, got clinically immersed, learned about what the problem is, saw what we did in the hospital. That's in the fall. Of course, then they go back, they start doing some idea generation, brainstorming, come up with many, many different types of potential solutions. Then they start building a prototype. Rice, Texas A&M, as well as I'm sure ASU, University of Arizona, they have engineering labs for which they can build prototypes. Then once they build the prototype, this is a model of a kidney. They place a stent, and this is them using a magnet to remove it without instrumentation and hopefully without the need that you can imagine for anesthesia. And hence, here we are. This is what they built. They presented it at the annual showcase. They're typical for capstone programs. This is like their final exam. They won first prize. They got $5,000 from the showcase. They also presented at the Minnesota DMD conference, and they won the grand prize for that student showcase. And this has led to SBR Phase 1. I'll get to that in just a little bit. But these are ways to take an unmet need in the OR, work with the engineering student team in the academic program over an academic year, come up with a prototype by the April showcase, and move on to the next steps. So I think, I mean, I didn't know about this. You know, I graduated from Cal with a mechanical engineering degree, never heard of it back then, but this is something that now every accredited engineering school has to have. Here's another example, and Bala may get to this, I won't spend too much time on it, but this is our maternal fetal specialists or fetal interventionists. They had some difficulty with loss of access during fetoscopic surgery. They want a way to keep the layers together so they don't lose access. Hence, they built a chorial anchor, and again, start with an unmet need by the clinician, work with the engineering team in the academic year to build a prototype at the end of the year, and that has moved on. So these are some of the physicians that have capstone projects this year. Now that we have the grant funding, we can fund many more than we did in the past couple of years when we didn't have the funding. So we'll probably have 10 projects at Texas A&M, 2 at Rice, where we can have the surgeons that come up with unmet need, describe it, part of the team, and this is really spread among all the different divisions, at least within surgery, and we'll open up to the rest of the hospital as well. But they're going to get a prototype by the end of the academic year, which actually is this month at the annual showcases. So once you have a prototype, what can happen? And I think that's where the capstone programs tend to sometimes not move on. I know some of them shouldn't move on because maybe they didn't make a lot of progress, but those that can, they can get a provisional patent, but they also need a funding source. And this is actually something that you may or may not be aware of. I wasn't very aware of it prior to coming to Texas, but the SBIR, STDR grant programs. Now, these are NIH grants, and this is where these are grants dedicated toward commercialization of the devices such that they get closer and closer to clinical use. So from that 2015-16 year, 2 of those projects move on to SBR funding. My project got SBR Phase 1. We didn't get scored well for the Phase 2. But the chorial anchor got SBR Phase 1 funding and looks pretty good to get the SBR Phase 2, which are much larger amounts. Now, you don't have to go through the capstone program. We had a couple projects outside of that that received their own SBI or STTR Phase 1 funding. But there are many different ways to get to that same endpoint. But this can help further develop your device. And this, again, this is all non-dilutive grant funding that doesn't need to lose equity for you. Now, this is some of the differences. So, you know, I was a basic scientist at one point in my life. I had K-weight funding. They called me a failed basic scientist. But if I'm going to spend my time, and if I'm going to look at where I'm going to spend my time here or there, we know R01 is the bedrock of medical science. We need basic science. We need to support basic science with R01 funding. You know, the pay line's pretty poor these days. You know, single digits. That's pretty challenging to spend a lot of time. As opposed to the SBR, STTR, which are R43, R44 grants, you don't need a lot of real estate. You work out of the ORs, you work out of the engineering labs. Also, the pay lines are much, much better. You know, they're probably 25 to 30 in most of the institutes. Plus, it gets you to a further work on your device project to help get you to that clinical goal of a device that you use for your patients. Now, there are some rallies of pediatric device projects. You know that most of these ideas will fail. I mean, that may not be such a good thing, or that may not be in your culture, but this is something that you will have to get used to, that it's acceptable to have failure. You know, you're going to work on 8, 10 things. Maybe 2 of them will move on to SBR funding at most. You know, that's just a reality. You have to accept that and just take the lesson learned and move on to the next step, and not run with it too long when it's going to have eventual failure. We also know that pediatric devices is challenging. They're usually not associated with large profits, so I can tell you I'm keeping my day job. I'm not going to live in the car, eat ramen all day. I mean, I'm going to keep my day job. Plus, I like being a doctor, taking care of patients, and doing surgery. But it is a different value proposition. I mean, our kids still need it. These are more mission-based projects, mission-based work. The kids still need it, even if there is not large profits associated. But we do need to get industry and our commercialization partners interested. And I think if you think of a mission-based project, thinking about their philanthropic arms, not their profit-based arms, I think you can get them. And we just also have to have different customers. I mean, this is where children's hospitals play a much bigger role as opposed to the open market. We do have some annual events. You're all welcome to come. Please join us. We usually have an annual Consortium symposium and business meeting. This past December, we had Eric Chen, who used to be at the FDA, as well as Bob Crosslis, who's the CEO of Berlin Heart North America, talking about humanitarian use device program. And then this year in December, we'll have Rachel Rath from the NEST Coordinating Center, which is really talking about real-world evidence, real-world data. You're all welcome to come. It should be that first week, Thursday, Friday in December. We also have our pitch competitions, open to all. On our website, you'll see the information how to get to those web pages and apply. The South by Southwest event is in mid-March. We usually put out the call probably in December or January. The Rice Business Plan competition, again, is dedicated towards students, and that deadline is usually February each year. And the Texas A&M one, also similar. That's more for Texas-based companies. But these are pitch competitions where you can receive usually up to $25,000, but some can receive up to $50,000. But these are needed money for your device projects in the early stages. So just for conclusion for my part, before I hand it over to Bala, we know that pediatric device development innovation is challenging, but nationwide progress is being made through the Pediatric Device Consortium program. And that now includes Houston, College Station, as well as the Southwest U.S., including Phoenix. You guys are all part of the consortium. And we also know that we have to have a little bit different model. Children's hospital and academics play a bigger role, as well as philanthropy plays a bigger role. And I think this also can be a great way for pediatric clinicians to get involved in pediatric research. You can stay busy clinically and possibly avoid burnout. And thank you very much. Yeah, any questions for this part before we hand it over to Bala? Okay.
Before I go to my presentation, sure I can get to it. Yeah. So one thing I want to draw your attention to is we talked about using engineering schools and the undergraduate capstone programs as a way to get a project started. And when I came to Texas A&M and Chester and I started talking, it was evident that a lot of these projects get to a certain point, and then you have to decide what to do with those projects. And my mission at A&M was to I was asked to build a graduate program focused on medical device development. And so the one thing that we all realized was, well, out of the 10 or so capstone projects we do in pediatric devices, there's probably 2 or 3 that can move forward. Then the question that comes up when you talk about graduate engineering students, graduate program-based engineering students, is how do you pay them to do the work, right? Because the way engineering schools are set up is once you get to graduate school, there's an expectation that you'll get paid to do research. And so that creates a new problem, which you don't have when you work with undergraduate students, right? So that's where we put these pieces together. And so the first thing I want to point out is there is a difference in terms of what happens at the undergraduate level and when you get to the graduate level. So if you look at this particular device and you look at this conceptual solution for a device that delivers 2 anchors, one on either side, one on the inner luminal surface of the uterus to essentially fixate the membrane against the uterine wall, right? And there's another anchor here. So this was the conceptual solution, and this was the 3D printed prototype. So great idea, but it's not something you can take to an animal study and run studies. So when you look at the actual device that was eventually developed, so this was now done by master's students, where there's a delivery system that's designed to provide the tactile feedback, keep the anchors in the right orientation and deploy them, but also a knot pusher that actually achieves fixation, okay? So there's a fundamental difference at the level of engineering we get to at the graduate level. And we're able to bring those students who are now getting trained with better engineering skills that step up from their undergraduate level. And so we realized that is the opportunity. The opportunity is to put, instead of putting graduate engineering students to do basic science research, why don't we take that energy and enthusiasm and the new skills they develop through a graduate program towards developing the next stage of the engineering solution. And that's the secret behind, getting this type of funding was, in fact, when we first seed funded with help from Texas Children's, we put master's students around it. The work they did suddenly became very funding friendly. So a lot of the work they did became, the feeder to the preliminary study section in your grant proposals. And they started producing things that looked like the real thing, but also worked like the real thing. So that's the one point I want to make before I move on to my presentation. So, and the reason is what I'm going to talk about is actually the program that has enabled us to deliver on this idea. So this is the BioInnovation Master of Engineering program, and we literally made this, the mission of this was to create industry-ready professionals. Whether they go to a startup or go to a large corporation, they have the tools and they've learned how to do this in an academic setting. So my own background, I'm going to not spend much time on it, but those are some of the 18 FDA clearances and approvals I worked on in my career. Very fortunate to have had that experience coming into this. So the idea is, how do you create a program that is focused on professional training and much like a law degree, you train them in the skills they need to go become functional in industry. And so we established this as the core mission, create a workforce that is focused on medical device development, product development. And the way we wanted to do that was to collaborate with hospitals and industry. And the idea was, when you think about it, traditional graduate programs create, deep training. What we wanted to do was create an I-shaped individual. So we wanted those students to have horizontal skills all the way from entrepreneurship, project management. How do you do risk analysis of a medical device? That's not something that's taught in traditional graduate programs, but that is the center, the core of the FDA, approval process is how do you manage risk? And everything you do by way of engineering and testing and clinical trials is demonstrating that you managed and mitigated risk. So that's something that's at the core of our program. We also want our students to continue to develop their technical domain skills. So we don't, just create broad trained individuals. We want them to pick instrumentation, imaging, mechanics, biomaterials as an area. So they do take courses in those areas and develop the next level of skill sets. But at the end of the day, everything is done in a project-based setting. That is the most important. So for the period they are here in our program, they actually work in teams on projects. A lot of the projects come from the Pediatric Devices Consortium, and some come from other hospital partners that we work with. So that is essentially the curriculum strategy that we put in place. Now, if you go a little bit further to the next level, what we realized was we need to have a mandatory project-based experience, and we put that in the fall semester, where students entering the program have to work on risk-based detailed design and testing. So what are we talking about here? The idea of engineering and testing devices in a quality management systems framework. So that's what the FDA expects you to do. And so the students learn how to write a product specification. They learn how to write intended use, because if you don't know the labeling you're going after, for your product, how are you going to design the risk management strategy? So we start with training them how to do hazards analysis, what types of patient harms are you going to anticipate. You start from that perspective. And then that feeds into risk analysis. We also teach them how to manufacture devices using real-world manufacturing. So while 3D printing is great, we actually train them on laser machining. We train them on how to do injection molding, catheter extrusion. So they learn all those skills in this class. In the summer, we actually have a innovation and translational R&D experience where students go through one of several paths. One path is we actually put groups of students in the operating rooms and they do procedural observations, ethnographic research, and they produce essentially new problem statements and new ideas for solve that need to be implemented. So these are the two core pieces of our training program, and it's year-round, and we accept students rolling through every semester. When it comes to how we have structured this, it's a 4-semester experience where the fall I just talked about this risk-based development testing of medical devices. That's every student goes through that, so they don't have a choice to avoid that course. It's a mandatory course experience. And this is a typical timeline in that project that they work on. So they have a stage gate-based process. So if you're a medical device developer, you will understand what these stage gates mean. And every stage gate, there is a team design review, and they go through the process before they move to the next phase. They produce all of the quality systems, the FDA design controls documentation that represents each of the stage gates. And most importantly, we force them to actually build devices that work. So here's one example. This is a device that is actually evacuating remnant stone particles. And so we've actually modeled a 3D printed model of the renal pelvis. And you'll see that there's a suctioning device that's being developed. It's a double movement system. So while fluid is being removed, fluid is also being replaced at the same time. So it's a dual lumen system with a filter at the back end to capture the particles. So that is it's a great example. Here's another one, which is basically a annulotomy repair device. So patients who have gone through nucleotomies have a defect in the annulus. So this is a device that delivers an anchor with a porous foam as a matrix to grow, essentially scar tissue to seal off the annulus post-surgery. So again, this is graduate student work. So you can see that what we try to do is make them not only do paper design, so computer models are great, crude prototypes are great, but at the end we want them to move this to the next stage in terms of the fidelity of the prototyping. So the end result is, our students, we started with 3 students in 2015 in the master's program. This year we have 31 students. And as of today, I think pretty much everyone in the current cohort has jobs. So that's what's unique about this, is we listen to our industry advisory board and we develop the curriculum. And we work with our clinician partners in using their resources, their great ideas, and we basically created a training program, which also has become sort of the funding engine and supports the Pediatric Device Consortium. I'm going to skip some of these other slides because I think I'd like to leave time for discussion. But one point I want to make is I talked about the Summer BioInnovation Immersion Fellowship, which is a separate competitive program. We accept about four master's students each year. And we use a technique called contextual inquiry. And the idea is, to try and get into the brain of the users in their environment. And so the technique we use is ethnographic research. It was actually, I learned it from my former colleague from the University of Cincinnati, Mary Beth Privitera. She's a master at this. So I'm still learning, but what I wanted to do was see if we can put our students through the paces and have them learn how to do this. I'm going to play a brief video, and I'll stop it. But this was a contextual inquiry experience in fetal surgery. That's not going to play. I have a feeling it's not going to play. Yeah. All right. Let me do this. So I'll show you the end result, which is, it's hard to see, but this is a typical output of a contextual inquiry study. So this is a 10-week experience where the student team is trained on how to go in and do what is known as time motion analysis. So what we mean by time motion analysis is we take an entire surgical case and break it down, into various steps. And what the students are looking at is, within each step, what are the challenges and what mitigations are the physicians applying to get around those challenges. And when you mash those two, you identify new problems that need to be solved. So from this fetoscopic surgery, we did it last summer with 3 students. We observed about 5 cases. We're going to continue that. And from the end result of that is going to be, it's definitely going to make it to the Journal of OB-GYN as a paper that we're going to write, potentially pediatric surgery as well. But the most important thing is at the bottom, which is what are the problem statements that came out of it? And then we work with the physicians to see, okay, of these 10 problems, which are the most important high priority problems that we need to pursue where engineering solutions can be implemented. The other thing with this technique is it allows you to timestamp each stage within the procedure and identify where the bottlenecks exist and so on. So that technique directly borrows from industrial and systems engineering. So if you have Arizona State University's industrial engineering department, you will find students who are actually trained to look at a process and actually sit in, with a stopwatch and watch, measure every step, how many instrument exchanges are going on. And when you go into that space, you start understanding, okay, can I combine, a certain number of steps and design a tool that will reduce the amount of time you spend on a certain case. And so the idea is, again, this is drawn again from Mary Beth's textbook. My students follow that textbook, which Mary Beth published, but it's the whole process. The entire process is something you experience in our program. Now, how does this happen? So we have GMP facilities, process controls. We have so this relates to the infrastructure and resources A&M has allowed me to put in place. We have a class 100,000 clean room where we do all of our device builds. So on our SBIR projects, we're doing all of the engineering builds in the clean room. Cleaning, packaging, sterilization all happens in this room. And we're able to build devices, sterile packaged devices for animal studies. So that is one important step, is if you want to be able to attract these SBIR types of proposals and the funding, the startup company may not have the resources to invest, or they may want to delay that investment until much later. Having those resources in the academic setting, so now the students are actually manufacturing these devices in that setting. They're learning about, how to do that in an FDA regulated environment. And so we have, ultrasonic cleaning. We have an Amproline ETO sterilization system in this room, clean room. We have E-beam sterilization on campus at Texas A&M, so we can go both ETO as well as E-beam sterilization. And again, tons and tons of lovely toys. So my students love spending our money to go buy the toys they need. But the gist of it is with its advanced materials, with its machining, with its injection molding, manufacturing. We have a laser machining system where we make, essentially devices to work with, atrial septal defect repair, so we can actually laser machine real small components that can go into, ASDs and PFO applications. And so that's what the message I want to leave is, when you build the ecosystem, you need the physicians who are the center of it all. You need a set of engineering teams who can migrate the project from concept phase to the engineering phase to the commercialization phase. And so if you think of who is in this ecosystem and then start thinking of putting it all together, it seems like from yesterday's discussion at dinner as well, there's already some of that happening. So it seems like there's already a nucleus of activity going on. It seems like it's just a question of then how do you formalize that, right? So with that, we'll take questions. You want to take that?
Access that powerful kind of those resources. We obviously know ASU as one
Right.
How are they
Right. So we did a similar trip to San Antonio, and that's I think one way to build it. So now you know what a consortium is. I think you have a lot of the pieces already in place. I mean, we already know capstone students already come to Phoenix Children's. Now, in terms of, it just matters knowing who your partners are. working then initially locally, because I think that'll probably work out the best. You know, we know that engineers have to come to the hospital because clinicians are very busy.
And from our side, you know, we have absolutely no issues sharing the structure of our curriculum with ASU. So if they don't have, you know, they don't have a program structured the way it needs to be, we can provide all of the materials that we have put together, and at that point, it's the engineering faculty who need to jump in and say, we want to do this. So that's the part that, you know, we haven't connected directly with ASU as yet. Are there any folks from ASU here? Okay, great. So we'd love to, I mean, you're probably already doing it, so I don't want to presuppose you're not doing it, right? I mean, we just, yeah, yeah. Right.
Right. I mean, I think you'll see a lot of examples, CTSI program. I mean, those are very similar. I think we're all talking about the same, they're just different programs. But anything that gets engineers, clinicians together to build prototypes to move on the next steps. I mean, what we can do as a consortium, you know, for example, if you have a startup, you fill out their intake form, we can try to connect you with consultants that you may need them, in case you need them. And, you know, they could be in Phoenix, they could be in Houston, they could be in some other city. We do have funding. That's the nice thing about having grant funding is we can give out money. So some examples are pitch competitions where you can apply, you could win money. We also can give out, well, we have some internal Baylor C grant funding, but I think that can be set up internally as well. So, and these can go a long way. Yeah. So I mean, I think we're all great adapters. I think we all learn how to be great adapters, take that adult device and bring it to a small, or use it in a pediatric setting. I think we're trying, I mean, I think people want to see, get away from the off-the-shelf use of adult devices in kids, a lot of times, which don't have the indication that's approved. They would love to see devices built for kids and maybe upsized to adult. I mean, it makes sense. I know there's some challenges commercially as well as maybe technically, but I think that we who are in the pediatric devices will love to see that. And to get away from just off-the-shelf use, finding devices that are built for kids first or maybe built for kids and adults at the same time, so we don't have to do the MacGyvering off-the-shelf use. I mean, there's nothing wrong with off-the-shelf use. I mean, AAP endorses it, so, but we know we have to use it. We don't want to take that away. But in terms of building new devices, it would be great to be built specifically for kids.
Yeah, I think that's a great point because we're currently incubating a couple of projects where the solution in the pediatric setting actually has a huge application in the adult indication. But we're staying focused on the pediatric because if you solve that problem with the degree of constraints you have around the engineering of that solution, it actually scales beautifully to the adult case as well. Yeah.
Chester, Paula, great talk. I really, really love how you guys are working together. And was curious what advice you have for us, you know, in the sense of the capstone students, you know, are enthusiastic. ASU engineering wants to build. There's tons and tons of energy on the ASU end, and there's lots of bright minds here who have ideas. So how do you actually formulate that? You know, and we know the leaders of the capstone projects over at ASU, but how do you get Chester, Texas children's docs enthused and marry them to the students at Texas A&M?
Yeah. So, I mean, I don't have anything against elderly doctors. I'm considering myself as well, but I think you tend to see the younger ones are a little more engaged, but older, young. But I would say old or young, it's just a matter of the mentality of do you have the appetite to do something new? And I think we all do. Now, At least the way we try to structure the capstone teams is that actually a lot of it ends up being surgeon-driven in the beginning. You know, you take that one page, you saw some examples, and you come up with a title, you describe your unmet need, what is your problem, what is the issue in the OR clinic, and at the very bottom, a very short paragraph about the goals, not the solution, but the goals. The solution is what the engineering students need to do over the academic year. Now, you take that template and you give it to the surgeon. If they fill it out, I know I want to work with them because they're going to spend the time to come up with a one-pager, which hopefully shouldn't take very long. But you got to just find the interested surgeons that are willing to work with the engineering team. And then during the year, I mean, they're still in the OR, they're still in a lot of patients, still getting the clinical salary, but they're also working with the engineering team, and that, you don't need your own lab. You don't need to spend a lot of time. You're having the calls once a week, maybe once every other week. If you have a fellow or resident, maybe they're taking the calls first, and you're there for the half year or the end of year presentations as the attending. So I think, you know, it fits very well to a clinical schedule. And this could be, you know, if you guys are following the burnout literature, this could be your 20%, you know, so that you can avoid burnout, so. Sure. Yeah. Right. I mean, I would tell you probably no one has a right answer yet, but I think one is other children's hospitals doing it. I think that does help to show that this is not just some random thing that's happening, that children's hospitals are working in this area. I think there's work towards building these kind of templates of the contracts, of the different paperwork that's needed. Once you get that, you know, you have a process, you have the template for contracts, I think that'll make things a lot easier. Then all that variability from that process will hopefully be taken out, and then it'll be much more accepting. I mean, basically, innovation is risk. You know, there is going to be risk. It's just how to mitigate it and reduce as much as possible, because you're not going to get that innovative device or new thing unless you take some risk. But hopefully, it's risk that is tolerable. Yes.
So I'll try to address that. So the question is what collaborations we have on the AI data science side of things, right? And you're talking about systems that will detect problems real time, right? And so that way you can address safety issues real time. So the couple of points I'll make is so there's a new regulation out for basically AI and data mining based platforms under the software as medical device umbrella right now. So I think one of you has got approval in that space. So we are actually doing one project right now. So Chester mentioned the real world evidence generation project. The core of that project is how can you get real world, real time data from, and in this case, the patient population we're looking at is type 1 diabetes patients. And so they are, so these patients are bombarded with different, devices that collect different types of data sets. And at the end of the day, they have to somehow make sense of what's going on and then manage their essentially their disease. And so we've put a team, it's basically a team of endocrinologists, a data science, data mining team, and a computer software development team, and they're actually building a system to connect all of this together. So there's that collaboration I can speak to. And the purpose of that is actually to alert the patient by predicting when they're going to have a hypoglycemic event, as an example. So in that framework, yes, you can detect patient harm a priori. The regulatory path for that is going to be, we're going to have to think through that. So it may be gated through, a clinical study that will require an investigative device exemption. And then you go and show that you do indeed mitigate the problem. So your question, I think, I'm going to have to answer it with many layers. The first layer is, yes, you can put those teams together, and that expertise typically comes from computer science engineering schools as well. So if you look at all these engineering schools, I can pretty much bet that every one of those schools has a major data science, data mining, AI program in engineering. Because if you think about it, it's a software layer and there's a hardware layer in all of these systems. The hardware layer is doing the sensing, the software layer is making the decisions. So the FDA line on this is very clear. If the software is making decisions, then you have to go through a risk assessment process, and there's different strata of risk involved. And depending on which strata you fall in, you have to do a certain level of testing to demonstrate that you've addressed that in a way that the patient is not harmed. So I kind of gave you a fairly lengthy answer. I don't know if I answered your question, so I'll let you respond. Yeah. So are you proposing a more universal approach for every device you develop, some kind of a sensor that detects problems? Is that what you're saying? Yeah. Yeah, I think, the way we build teams is it's a just-in-time model. So we know that, you need to solve a problem in urology or a problem in wound care. We pick the teams based on the skill sets needed. So our teams usually come out of the engineering schools or other, maybe it's public health, so we have to source it from those departments. So it's not like we have this big team waiting to solve every problem. We do real-time, just-in-time team building. So I would argue, it's hard to say for me, does every device need something like that? Probably not, but there are some devices that will need, especially those devices that incorporate software, are going to need a different type of risk assessment strategy, right? And sort of real-time risk mitigation as well. So I don't know if you guys can speak to that. I know you built something to characterize aneurysm morphology, which then the clinicians are going to use for decision making, right? So I don't know if you guys had some thoughts around that.
I think we have just one more question in the back. You had a question? Right. So pediatric devices, I think, is the easy way to go because not a lot of money there. So granted, You should file the IP eventually, but I have no problem talking about things because I know it's not going to make a lot of money. So, but, I mean, it's important, you know, cross your Ts, dot your Is, but if it's going to stop you from working with engineers, I'd say don't worry about it.
Again, we've solved it in a way that's much more collaborative, so we have what's known as a teaming agreement between A&M and Baylor. And what the teaming agreement lays out is some basic, principles of how, if IP is generated, how it's going to be shared. And we just went down the limits of 50/50, we're all putting, resources into this. And if there's an adult indication, then there's, you have to think about who's going to license that technology from you. And so maybe a commercial partner here in this ecosystem, and then you establish a licensing model to do that. So I can speak from the A&M perspective. What we've done is we've created certainly the teaming agreement's working out great because we just say, okay, this needs to be filed, who's going to need it, who's going to pay for it, we make a decision to file. We know that everybody's going to win in that model because the teaming agreement spells out ahead of time how things are going to be shared. The licensing model for A&M engineering, I'll speak to engineering specifically, is pretty straightforward. So we've created a model that allows the company to license. Let's say the students want to form a company, right? The students graduate, want to form a company. Our licensing term sheet is half a page. So when we don't want to limit our engineering startups and their ability to move forward by putting them through a very long and torturous negotiation. So we forced our IP group to work with it. And I just happened to be the head of that whole team, so I was able to, which is pretty hard. But we got general counsel office to do it. And it's a simple one-page licensing term sheet. And we don't take, we don't take large portions of something. We keep our royalty rates very low so that they don't have to be limited when they go seeking private investment.
I want to thank everyone for coming and thank our two speakers, and then we'll move over to the neuroscience classroom. But I do want to make one point before we all leave while most of our surgeons are still here. So there's two models for clinical innovation that we talked about, and this audience has in common in that we're all sort of devoted to furthering child health. And as people who are vested in that goal, we can think of two different models of innovation to drive our field forward. And one is the traditional model, which was mostly emphasized today, is that as clinicians we have a need, that we perceive a need, and we imagine a device that will solve that need, and then we work with our colleagues in engineering to solve that problem. But another model which was mentioned just briefly that I want to put a little bit more emphasis on as an opportunity for innovation is the concept of the ethnographic study. So one of our colleagues, Mary Beth Privatiera, really pioneered this concept. And this concept places the surgeon as the experimental subject. So we have a group of design experts and engineers who follow us around all day into the operating room and the interventional suites and just watch us work and analyze us and basically create stick figures of us and how we move and focus on the most mundane aspects of what we do. For example, do we grab a device underhanded or overhanded? And that difference led to such an epiphany that in Mary Beth's work really changed a lot of surgical practice within a certain area. Is when we grasp a device, regardless of whether we're left or right-handed, do we have an underhanded grip or an overhanded grip, and how does that affect our efficiency? And so this is one way, as surgeons and clinicians, you all can contribute to innovation, because rather than us perceiving what we're doing wrong, because in many cases we don't perceive, but somebody who follows us around all day and watches us perform the surgery may recognize that we're doing something inefficiently. right? And come up with a better way to do it, a better tool, a better way to hold the tool. So ethnographic studies and analysis are another hugely important way that as clinicians we can drive child health to the next level. So I just want you all to think about that. And any comments on that, Bala?
Yeah, I mean, I just want to give an example. It's Todd and I had been exposed to this, so we were fortunate to see Mary Beth in action. But, you know, the simplest example is actually, you know, when you design a toothbrush for kids, you know, you actually design a big fat handle and not a thin handle. Okay, so when they were because the way children holds things is like that. They don't have the fine motor skills to hold something that way. So that actually translates to if you're doing, you know, for instance, hand tool design, you know, how you hold something is going to greatly affect, you know, your ability to achieve your clinical endpoint. And so the human factors element and the observation of how people use existing products today is central to how you can improve their experience as well. So the way we talk about when we make these observations, we're actually capturing what are known as points of pain and points of delight. And, you know, in these summer experiences, we literally collect, you know, in a single case, we may observe 5 different cases. We may collect, you know, between 1,000 to 2,000 data points that then we have to figure out how to resolve that confusion and come up with the problem statements. And that's the chart that I show. It actually sits on a wall, but at the end of the day, that fetal surgery exercise, we identified, for instance, one of the big problem statements is because you only have one view of the baby in a fetoscopic, it's a single incision surgery, you don't have the perspective. You cannot compose a 3D image. At the same time, you need to all the time be able to see the incision site. And guess what? The baby moves around. It's moving. And so one of the big problem statements is how do you maintain a stable view of your surgical field? So that came out of, and so a lot of the time is spent in manipulating the fetus so you can have the right view, not just visual view, but also approach angle and so on for your instruments, right? So that is a problem statement that I can now take to engineer and say, okay, let's go solve this. And that came purely from this ethnographic observation. And that's the point that Todd was making. Yeah, thanks. Yeah.
So we're gonna break, and there is a round table, you know, for another hour over in the neuroscience conference area. We said RSVP, but if anybody has questions and wants to come on over, come on over. If you have the time, we will have a great discussion. But thank our guests, you know, Bala, Chester. Yeah, this was a great conversation, great presentation. Thank you.